You've said cyber threats are the biggest risk facing the United States. Why?
Because our systems are all basically on the internet. And that means not just our data about personal information, but it also means our control systems that operate many of the critical machines that are supporting our infrastructure. So that a serious malevolent attack using cyber methods on our systems could result in the kind of damage comparable to what we experienced on September 11th.
In the past, you've talked about the need for the government to become involved in facing cybersecurity threats. So earlier this year, the White House established the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. Can you explain a little bit about what it is? Does it go far enough? And what else is needed?
Well, it's helpful. It's not sufficient by any means. What it's designed to do is to bring together the various intelligence sources that the government has to see what's out there in terms of threats, so the government can have a kind of a comprehensive picture. But you've still got to get that information to the private sector. The private sector needs to have the capability to respond to attacks. And there has to be a clear understanding of what the government will do and what the private sector has responsibility for. And that hasn't been done yet. So we've made some progress, but we've got much more progress to make. Well, I think the private sector is responsible mainly for defending its own networks, and that means having an architecture in place that is reasonably well secure, training people about what to do and what not to do, and making steps to monitor their systems to see if there's anything that's anomalous. Now, the good news is there are new technologies that are being developed. People are now focusing attention on research and development in the security area. One of the challenges for private business is there's almost too much out there. How do you know what to buy? And that's why our philosophy is you have to start by analyzing the architecture and the strategy and the values in your own enterprise. And only when you understand what your critical needs are and what your critical assets are, can you begin to talk about what are the right tools to put in place to protect your network.
So you're here in Mexico. To what degree does the United States work with Mexico, and to what degree do North American countries work together in terms of facing cybersecurity threats? What more needs to be done?
Well, you know, we do live in a seamless world as far as the internet is concerned, and I do think we ought to be working more closely with the Mexican and Canadian governments, both in terms of intelligence sharing, but also in terms of coming up with common standards for cybersecurity that can be propagated to the private sector. Because right now I think there's a bit of a sense here in Mexico that they're behind the United States. They don't even have the capabilities the US has. And certainly if that's true, the US ought to be sharing some of those cyber defense capabilities with Mexico, because we do have relatively integrated economies. We do have cooperation with the Mexican defense community, intelligence service, and police. A lot of that has frankly been focused on organized drug cartels and terrorists, maybe not so much on cyber threats. But it seems to me that the experience of that cooperation can be translated as well into the area of cooperation in cybersecurity.
In talking about security in general, we can see that in Mexico, organized criminal groups diversify as their leadership is threatened. That could mean expanding into different types of cybersecurity threats. Can you talk a little bit about that? What types of threats are faced, and what can be done to prevent it?
Well, I mean, the experience of the United States is instructive. When we go back 100 years or 80 years, we had La Cosa Nostra was very powerful. I was a prosecutor. I prosecuted some of the bosses of the families back decades ago. And we saw something of the same phenomenon, that as pressure was put on traditional methods of criminal activity, they diversified. So if you look at the organized crime groups in the US now, a lot more of what they do is systematic online fraud, extortion online, manipulation of securities using online techniques. and less of the old traditional types of criminality where people came around and threatened to break your legs if you didn't pay them. I suspect you'll see the same thing here in Mexico. As you begin to push back on the traditional money making, which is the drug trafficking, but also things like kidnapping, these groups will begin to get into other areas. And that's why it's important to look not just at the problem that we face now with criminality, but to anticipate where these groups are going to go next. And actually, organized crime is now making millions and millions of dollars globally by operating on the internet. And they're able to make literally millions of dollars in a single day, sometimes by manipulating cyber capabilities and getting into banks or similar institutions.
Thank you.